This morning, we're bringing you a CNN exclusive. The U.S. military is reportedly crowdsourcing ideas for the Iran war, sending out an email asking troops for creative and unconventional ways to punish and put pressure on Iran. CNN's Zach Cohen broke this story. What did you learn as you got this information that there was a request out there to help with Iran in any way possible?
Yes, Sarah. Sources telling me and our Katie Bo Lillis that the U.S. military is casting a wide net as it's seeking new ideas for how to ramp up the pressure on Iran. And it comes as the U.S. military and Central Command in particular is reevaluating their current strategy and the options that are currently available to President Donald Trump intended to bring Iran to the table on his terms. And that includes this effectively a crowdsourcing email that we're told was sent to a broad range of U.S. military analysts and military planners last week, just before President Donald Trump issued those threats to escalate the conflict with a new round of military strikes, ultimately walking that threat back this weekend. But we're told that the email itself asked for, quote, creative and unconventional ways to pressure and punish Iran. And this is significant on a couple of different fronts. One, multiple sources we talked to said that the request itself is not necessarily a bad idea. Clearly, the Trump administration has been looking for a way to ramp up that pressure on Iran in a pursuit of some sort of a diplomatic negotiated agreement that has eluded them to date. But at the same time, the request also betrays the idea that this strategy currently being used by the U.S. military is not having the effect that the president and the Pentagon want to see. So one source put it to me this way. At the end of the day, POTUS will want a deal. So he'll continually look for ways to get tough and get out of this. You need creative minds at times, especially if you're running out of conventional options. And we've reported, too, previously that both the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency have assessed that the kind of airstrikes the U.S. military has been carrying out to date are unlikely to force Iran back to the table on Donald Trump's terms. And so there is this reluctance, though, at the same time, to escalate the conflict. We know that there was reporting by CNN and others last week that the president was considering potential strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure, for example. That has elicited concerns from the Pentagon and the intelligence community about what potential impact that might have. And we went to U.S. Central Command for comment for this reporting, and they responded that, quote, U.S. Central Command has a long history of thinking and working in innovative ways. Admiral Cooper, in particular, reaches out to members of our great team, regardless of rank, to achieve the highest levels of operational possible. So we'll ultimately have to see if any new fresh ideas come from this crowdsourcing email or other conversations. But it's clear that the Pentagon is looking for a new path forward.
The president says they are going to be in talks today. We will see what happens there. Zach Cohen, great reporting from you. And Katie Bo, thank you. Appreciate it.
U.S. President Donald Trump again calling off a threatened massive attack on Iran, saying talks are resuming today. Iran, for its part, saying negotiations with the U.S. are not happening now. Iranian state media report Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke with senior Saudi and Pakistani officials on Sunday night, though, and the foreign ministry says Iran is in talks with Oman to establish a safe temporary corridor for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. So where do things stand at the beginning of this week? We've got Elena Treen at the White House for you. Elena, what are you hearing about the status of negotiations and where things may be headed this week?
Yeah, look, clearly, and we've seen this now multiple times throughout the entire course of this war, Becky, you're hearing one thing from the United States and the Trump administration and a different thing from the Iranians. But the president seeming to have an optimistic tone yesterday when speaking with reporters, said that talks with Iran will resume this afternoon. Iran, for their part, arguing that there's been no indication that that's going to happen and that they're solely negotiating with the Omanis. Now, this comes after, as you mentioned, Becky, that the president, who had been planning and had kind of previewed a massive attack on Iran over the weekend, called off those strikes, arguing, one, that he had spoken with several leaders throughout the Middle East. That includes speaking directly, we were told, with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Iran. Those leaders telling the president that they were worried about the impact of such a major attack, what the retaliation would look like for their own country, countries, but also, of course, what it could do to the very fragile talks happening behind the scenes regarding this broader war. The president also, though, argued that there has been a deal, or parameters of a deal at least, to try and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, for their part, arguing there is no such long-term deal, that they are talking, they said, with the Omanis to have some sort of temporary solution to allow for free transiting of vessels in the strait. So very messy, and a lot of different versions of events depending on which country you are looking at and what you're hearing from the U.S. officials versus Iranian officials. Now, I will say, just to give you a little sense of more of what we heard from the president, he argued yesterday when speaking with reporters on Air Force One that Iran was willing to come to a deal on the strait. He said because they knew that there was going to be this major attack. He also confirmed that these different Middle Eastern countries had asked him to hold off. He said we were all set to go, but when the allies asked to call it off, they got us sort of saying, well, let's see. The reason is they think that there is going to be a deal. So a lot of questions here. I'd also remind you about the dynamics and the political dynamics really happening back in the United States. This war has now been started and stopped for weeks now, and it comes just 3 months now until the November midterm elections. A lot of uncertainty around the economy, and one of the biggest questions and problems facing this administration is something that wasn't a problem before this war began, which is, of course, reopening the Strait of Hormuz. So a lot that they still need to work through. Will be trying to figure out what the sort of talks that the president was referring to are going to look like this afternoon, and bringing the news.
With us now, retired Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. General, always great to see you. What do you think of this request for ideas, this crowdsourcing notions for how to deal with Iran?
Well, I think it's a good idea. Now, CNN wasn't clear. It said in the headline they were requesting it of troops. In the write-up, it says you're requesting it of analysts. I can assure you that they didn't send me a note, so I suspect they're trying to keep that internal to the uniformed military. Look, I was a CENTCOM planner many, many years ago. I was a planner many, many years ago, and we were always reaching out to the different intelligence agencies and other organizations to develop branches and sequels. That's not a sign of failure. It just is a sign that, as we say, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So after you've been fighting the campaign for a while, it's good for you to think about, now that we know where we are, beyond what the plan said, how do we take it forward? So I think it's refreshing that Admiral Cooper is doing this. I think there are many that suggest that this is a sign of failure. I wouldn't consider it that at all. I think it's a pretty good idea, as a matter of fact.
So where do you think things stand today with Iran? The president said he was calling off a planned bombing campaign. He said there could be talks as soon as today. The Iranians, they're not saying that there's any talks going on. But if there are talks, do you think that, I don't know if this is the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th time, but do you think this will be the charm?
Look, we've got a lot of diplomacy left in this entire campaign. I'm glad to see the president mentioned nuclear capabilities, because too many people are getting distracted by the issue with the Strait of Hormuz. That is important, no doubt. But the core elements of the plan, and the reason we went to military conflict, is to end their nuclear program, push back their missile program, and cut their links with proxies. And I fear that if we focus too much on the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to allow the Iranians to divert the entire campaign from the core principles.
The Memorandum of Understanding, which is no longer in effect, to what extent did that address your concerns about the Iran nuclear program? If the United States gets back to the Memorandum of Understanding, is that enough?
It's a start. You remember the Memorandum of Understanding was an agreement to start discussions. It was in many ways meant to be a confidence building measure between the two sides to see if we could get to the real diplomacy, which were those 3 points that I mentioned. It obviously didn't work. If we get back to a working Memorandum of Understanding that allows us to get back to negotiations on the key principles, that'll be a good thing. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we've got a lot of war fighting left to do. And that goes back to what Admiral Cooper is trying to do, figure out some other ways in branches and sequels.
We will see what happens by the end of the day, if there are discussions, and if so, what comes of it. Brigadier General, retired Mark Kimmitt, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.